Welcome to Less Than 15, a show for busy business owners brought to you by DFK Australia, New Zealand. Each week we deliver bite-sized, actionable insights from industry experts so you're across the issues that really matter. I'm your host, Angela Rasmus. Let's dive into this week's topic. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Less Than 15 podcast. Today we have Daniel Shaw, Director and Self-Managed Super Fund Specialist at DFK Benjamin King Money in Melbourne. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate your time with us today.
Thanks for having me, Angela.
You're so welcome. So what we're going to dive into here is to really look at what a self-managed super fund is and who it suits when it comes from a business perspective. There's plenty of individuals who have probably explored this, but we're going to look through a different lens today. So Daniel, if you could give us your definition of a SMSF, the tongue twister, and why does it hold appeal specifically for business owners in your experience?
Well, an SMSF, strictly speaking, is a special type of trust, but everyone has their own superannuation funds, but it's really the DIY of super. If you've got, say, an industry fund, you've got a trustee who deals everything for you, all the admin, all the investing, whereas in SMSF, it really is DIY. You're doing everything that those trustees should be doing. You're investing, you're doing the admin, you're talking to professionals around different types of transactions. So, and that ability to do that is a great flexibility that a lot of people who inquire around SMSFs are sort of looking for. They don't want to be stuck with a certain section of investments, having to deal with nameless people over the phone for actions they want to do about making contributions or withdrawing or anything out like that. They don't want to call a helpline and be waiting for some tedious music. They want to be able to do it themselves and have that control. So it's greater control over the types of investments which we're getting from potential clients, and they're looking for the different options anyway. With the bigger funds, it's probably sort of infrastructure projects or a certain segment of investments, whereas an SMSF, you've got really a broad range of investment options possible, whether or not that's direct property, residential or commercial, fractional property, borrowing, which is one big thing we get asked around, which is a way to sort of supercharge your fund, being in property syndicates, and the other types of investments that come across, including crypto, which is a big interest as well.
And we'll dive down into some more examples of what is possible that you've seen with your clients shortly. But what I'm hearing is that you've got a person perhaps who is more proactive and a little more open to taking a little bit more risk, which is probably the profile of the average business owner who's decided to go out on a limb anyway. So who do you think, in the experiences that you've had, who is a good fit to take the reins in this type of way?
That's a good question, because not everyone does suit an SMSF. People can have multi-millions in super and they're not the right fit, or could have less and be the right fit. There is some modeling which suggests at around $200,000, the cost of an SMSF is comparable with an industry fund, and anything above that, it can be less costly than being in other funds. So I can't necessarily give you the advice on who should, but 200K is kind of a rough starting figure. But below that can make sense in certain circumstances, and those circumstances need to be assessed on an individual basis. So let's say you've got the right balance. It's someone who is proactive. You touched on, you want to be managing things. Someone who's curious about what they can and can't do. But someone is sort of almost most importantly who is engaged with the process. They come to you before, they listen to your advice, they take it. They do question the odd thing, because generally if they're doing it themselves, they want to know the why. So people who are engaged in the process and reach out, and I guess they want to align certain elements of their business and retirement, which is sort of the property element, by having an SF with their balance, buy a property and then rent it out to their business. So there's a dual purpose there, that the fund has a very significant asset which is going to provide for their retirement, and the rent from the business, which they get the deduction for, is going into the fund. So it kind of can be a boost for their retirement in using a strategy like that. It's not a set and forget. As I said before, you need someone who's engaged, because people who set and forget, they're hard to deal with. They become late with their lodgements, or they question things because they haven't taken the time to understand it. And you always want to be dealing with clients who want to be working with you, not sort of just contacting you once a year to get the work done. It's not necessarily a great relationship for either party.
So that's what I'm hearing, is really understanding that self-motivation and that proactivity is
Yeah.
as important as anything else. Because with the right guidance, it's not necessarily complicated, but it does take some time. So you need to be willing to make that investment, no pun intended. Okay.
Yes.
Well, let's you gave a couple of examples there of some of the more classic ways that you may be investing in options there in an SMSF.
Mm.
But what are some more surprising ones, perhaps, that become options when you are managing your own super?
Well, I think still, the people still are surprised with business, have an SMSF which can rent it to your business. Now, you can't do it for residential, so commercial is kind of the only one you can. But I think that still surprises people, and the fact that you can borrow to do so. Um, Using a unit trust to potentially have a co-shared property ownership when you can't afford the whole purchase price, and you want to have a separate amount outside, where you can't get the borrowing. As I touched on before, sort of that fractional investing is becoming interesting space to be in, because not everyone can have a lot of money in super to buy a property. So there's companies that do that. Crypto, it can be done, a lot of rules around it. Ethical investing is something where more the management providers are offering it to people, and we are seeing some clients who are under management or who have access to this type of investment advice to get into the ethical investing. Because a fund can invest in anything as long as it meets a certain criteria. So it really
Yep.
is broad. I mean, we've had people with certain collectibles which come with their own sort of risks, but yeah, a fund can really invest in anything as long as there's no use by a related party. So it's quite a broad brushstroke that people can apply.
There's almost some creativity that's here as well when it coming along with that. Not creativity in any
No,
sort of illegal way,
no,
but
no,
but
within the
thinking,
boundaries.
yeah, absolutely. But there those boundaries, it sounds like are potentially broader and richer than you would have thought at first look. So if we're thinking about risks or misunderstandings, let's make sure that we're forewarned here. Are there things that you really want people to understand or be aware of before they make these sort of decisions to move into doing it themselves?
So because it is DIY, you do need the help of your advisor who is educated in these spaces, whether that's an accountant, financial planner, or a lawyer. Because it is as DIY, you can make mistakes, or people can have access to money before they're meant to. Super
Uh-huh.
is for retirement purposes, or other sort of ancillary purposes, but it's basically set up so you can retire with money to live off. It's not for anything before then. So
Yeah.
making sure that what you're doing is for the best benefit of retirement, which is called the sole purpose test. That's the main overarching factor. And one that we always look at when we scrutinize any type of transaction.
Mhm.
But as I sort of said earlier, being engaged with your advisor before, I'm thinking of doing this, and then you get the appropriate advice. After the fact is very hard for us to do anything creative within the rules, and it creates often bad outcomes for the advisor and the client themselves, because both in lose-lose positions. So unfortunately, it is a highly regulated area, which means the advice can be costly, but getting it at the time rather than after, it's going to save you
Yeah,
a lot more heartache at the end.
that makes
So
sense.
yeah, if you've got the right advice, it shouldn't be too painful.
Okay. And that sole purpose test, there was a very simple way of describing it, which makes perfect sense. So when you've got the right advisor, when you've asked for the right advice, those regulatory obligations in particular, that's the dotting the I's and crossing the T's, which is so important. Okay, so if someone is listening now and thinking, well, you know what? I might get out of what I'm doing now and move myself towards a self-managed super fund. I know you've put together a resource for us, which will be available for a download on the podcast page on the DFK ANZ website, and also in the show notes, wherever you happen to be listening to this. And that is taking us through those 6 phases, what you call the lifestyle of a super fund. So that's going to be really useful. So there's one action step straight away. But what would you say then are the next steps to take for someone who is interested in going down this path?
I think it's important to keep reinforcing is talking to your advisor early, because the way an SMSF is set up, as I said, it is a trust and there's ways to establish the structure. But so there's a lot of things to consider at the start. So the first step is to talk to your advisor and say, look, I'm thinking of this. If that advisor is an accountant, we're unfortunately not able to give advice, but it would be in conjunction with, say, an accountant and a financial planner licensed to give advice in this area to talk through what's the best solution or step forward, because it might not be an SMSF right now, but it might be, okay, well, when is the most appropriate time? Or it might just be, well, it's not appropriate at all. As I said, everyone doesn't suit it, and sometimes there'll be situations where that arises, but engaging those trusted advisors early gets you on the path to getting it set up properly the first time, or going down a different path. But you'll have a resolution that's more appropriate much more sooner.
And how about the other thing that was just occurring to me, which makes perfect sense, get the right people on your team to explore this. But how about if you did a little bit of research yourself in terms of what potential investment options there are that appeal to you as an individual? Do you find clients that come to you and they say, I've been looking at this, I've been looking at that? Is that something that is worth doing, or is it wait and have that conversation before you go down the winding path?
I think it's always good to do a level of your own research. There is a lot of good material on the ATO website, which talks about the do's and don'ts in quite plain speak. So if you're going through that, that's a good process. I think in terms of those options, like you sort of said earlier, people often will try and mimic what they're doing outside of their fund with their own investment stuff and try and do it within. So it's kind of, well, having that thought bubble, doing a bit of research, getting a little bit of an understanding, and then talking to the advisors. So you say, well, I'm thinking about this, what do you think, or not? I mean, it's always good to have a bit more knowledge at your own research, but the conversation with the advisors is probably the most important bubble, because sometimes we find that clients or potential clients who've done their research, and to be honest with them, they've misinterpreted something and gone ahead and done it. That's kind of what I was referring to earlier. If it's after the fact, we've got much less options for rectification. So it's kind of do your research, check with us, and then that's kind of the next step forward, because then you're both on the same path, because you understand what they understand and they understand what you understand, and sort of that harmonious relationship between the client and the advisor.
Which is what we're after. Okay, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And to you, our lovely listener, make sure you pop over and download that resource that has been created for you that takes you through that life cycle of a self-managed super fund. And be proactive. Let's have a look at this and see whether or not it is an option that works for you. You've got some great guidance here from Daniel, and we'd love to hear how it works for you. So thanks for your time, and we look forward to inviting you into the next episode of Less Than 15. Until then, take care. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Less Than 15 and have a fresh idea or two to take action on. Hit the subscribe button so you catch every bite-sized business bulletin. And we'd love you to leave a review or perhaps share the episode with a friend. Less Than 15 is brought to you by Accountants and Business Advisors DFK Australia New Zealand, helping business owners make better decisions through local knowledge, national connections, and global reach. We'll be back next week with more valuable insights to help you and your business grow.